So we're on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. 5 lines down in the wide lines. Mem Zayin? Yeah. Amar Ula Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Achel Chalev v'hifresh carbon. It's an interesting halacha. Someone who ate chalev, which is the classic thing that you chayiv, it's a classic lav. He was over in a lav. So he has to bring a carbon. He has to bring carbon chat. He did it by mistake. So he has to bring a carbon. So he separated his carbon chatas. The hamir dasai, and then he went off the derech. He said, "I'm a mummer. I don't believe in anything." V'chazer by, and then he was chazer b'tshuva. Hoil v'nidcha yidcha. Since the rule is that someone who is a mummer, someone who has thrown off the shackles of belief, is not able to bring a carbon. So, since there was a time that he was not able, that this carbon was not able to be brought, after it was designated, once it's nidcha, once it was pushed off yidcha, it can no longer be brought at all. Excuse me. We're not makabel. Rashi says Rashi brings from a pasuk. A mummer is not allowed to bring a carbon. So this person, while he was a mummer, he couldn't bring the carbon. Similar case, but slightly, just a little bit different. If someone separated a carbon for carbon chatas, and then he became insane, became a shaita. A shaita also can't bring. You have to have kavana. You have to have the correct kavana, the intention that it should be for a carbon. While he's a shaita, he's not able to have that intention. Therefore, the carbon is not able to be brought. And then he got cured. The same din, since it was pushed off for a time, it was unable to be brought, it now becomes permanently pushed off, and he can't bring it as his carbon. We need both of these examples. If we just said the case of someone who became a mummer, in that case, it was the person's decision. He decided to become a mummer. So it sounds a little bit worse. Someone who becomes a mummer, it's within his control. Mashenkin, someone who becomes a shaita, it's out of his control. So maybe that the first dichoy of becoming a mummer, that pushes it off forever. Aval hai the mele kadachi. But if someone who became a shaita, he was involuntarily committed. Maybe ema kiyashin dami. Maybe that person like someone who fell asleep. Now, obviously, someone who's sleeping can't bring a carbon. He's sleeping. We don't say it's yidcha that it becomes, there's no such thing. Very rarely will a person designate a carbon, like he lives far away and he brings a carbon. He's going to have to sleep over on the way there. So, that people sleep after they designate carbon. And you don't say, since he was sleeping, it becomes hudcha. But I might say, the case of someone who became a shaita is similar to one who was sleeping, because it wasn't, again, a person has to sleep, and sometimes the person goes insane. It's not his choice. But it's not considered that it was nidcha. It's not considered it was pushed off. It was just, he was temporarily incapable of bringing it. But so maybe that, you might make that distinction. You might say that someone who became a mummer, the carbon becomes ineligible permanently. But someone who became a shaita, doesn't become permanently ineligible because it's like someone who's sleeping. V'yashmin and hacha, and the Gemara says it could even go the other way. I might say by someone who became a shaita, bishum de'em biyadei lachzer. It's not up to the person to decide that he's going to become cured from his insanity. So he doesn't have the ability to bring the carbon once that time when he's unable to bring it is very permanent because nothing can do about it. But someone who became a mummer, that's his choice to become a mummer. It's his choice to go back from that. Maybe not tzricha. That's why you have to say both examples. Amr of Yosef, Avanan na mitznina. I also learned this in a Mishnah. Hayuba kachim mizbeach. If we're talking about here in Ir Hanidachas, let's quickly see the Rashi because he gives the din of what happens if you have an Ir Hanidachas. Ir Hanidachas is a city where most of the people were over avodah zara, and the rule is that the people of the city get killed and all the belongings get burned. So Dr. Rashi, Hayuba kachim Ir Hanidachas ein nisrafim im shlalo. the kachim that were part of the Iranidachas, let's say someone in the city had designated a animal as kachim, it doesn't get burnt together with the rest of the belonging. You only burn the property of the city, but not the property of the city that really belongs to Hashem, which is kachim. However, you also can't bring this carbon. You can't bring like this, and this is what we said before. Someone who's a mummer, someone who's a rasha, you can't bring his karbanas. So these are all rishayim, the people in the city. So you can't bring their karbanas. Therefore, the din of all of them, as the Gemara is about to say, to go back to the Gemara here, but kachim mizbeach yamusay. If it's something that's intended to be brought as a carbon, it has to be killed. Kachim bet the kabayis yiftu. But if it's only something that was designated for its value, so that you can be paida, and then it becomes mutter, because it doesn't belong to the people of the city, and it doesn't become aser like kachim mizbeach. Vavinaba amaya musu. Why do we say that these karbanas that were part of the Iranidachas belong to people in Iranidachas? You have to kill them. Why don't we say kiven de iktel? Why don't we say since the people of the town are killed in the course of that's the din of Iranidachas, that people get killed? Havilu kapara, they get a kapara. The leskuv legvaya. Let's now bring the carbon as a carbon, and it's no longer a tayeva. It's not Zavach Rishayim Te'eva, because these people are no longer Rishayim. After they die, they go straight up to Shemayim. Right? La Mishum Damrin and Hayel B'nidchu Yitchu. So the Gemara finally bring it back to our topic. So the reason why it must be that you can't bring these karbanas is because even though now they're eligible to be brought, but there was a period where they weren't, when their owners were Rishayim. And therefore they became ineligible, and now they became eligible again. It's already yitcha. Amle Abaya. Abaya answers back. Misavis meis mitech rishay havale kapara. Do you think that someone who dies while he's a rasha, he gets a kapara? Meis mitech rishay lo havale kapara. No, it's not the case. If someone dies and he was a rasha, he doesn't get a kapara just from getting killed for what he did. The Tanir of Shemaya. Yachal afilu pirshu avoisa midarche tzibur yitma. What is this talking about again? Yit bidacha, like a mumma. So became a mumma. Oh, this is talking about the din that someone who a kayin is supposed to be metama to his kraven, even though a kayin normally is not allowed to be metama to a mace, but to his kraven. But we learn out, maybe we learned in the Brisa, maybe even if the father, the mace, was someone who's a mummer, maybe the son who's a kayin should be metama to him, tamalema ba'amav. But oisa ma'isa amav, only when he's oisa ma'isa amav. But we have the same question. Once he dies, l'chayra, he's no longer a rasha. He gets a kapara from his death. Elamaya must be, but since he died while he was still a rasha, he remains a rasha. Says, what do you bring a raya from a kain? A kain wasn't killed. We're talking about a kain who was a mummer and he died. When he wasn't killed for it, of course he doesn't get a kapara from just dying. What we said as a kapara is someone who gets killed as a iranidachas, or someone who gets killed by Mrs. Bezdin. They get a kapara. We're never suggesting that someone who just dies. Since he died in a normal way, he doesn't get a kapara. But someone who gets killed because of his evil acts, since he's getting, that's certainly a lot harder to be executed. Havle kapara. Teda, and Rabbi says, I'll bring you a raya. The chsiv, mizmal asaf elikim, mizmal asaf elikim bo goyim benachlasecha. The goyim have come into your land. Timu es heichal kodshecha, the matama, the kodshim, the Beis Hamikdash. Nosnu es nivlas avadecha machal loif hashemayim. They gave the nevelas of your servants as food for the birds. Basa chasidecha l'chaisei aretz, and the basa, the bodies of your chasidim, to be eaten by the animals in the field. My avadecha, my chasidecha. What are these two things that are mentioned in the pasuk? That after they're killed by the invading malachim because of the averus of Klal Yisrael, that they're going to be fed to the birds and to the animals. What is the avadecha and chasidecha? Lav chasidecha, chasidecha mamish. Doesn't chasidecha mean those that are actual tzaddikim? Avadecha hani dem chai vidina meikar v'kim dekel karlu avadecha. And avadecha are those that really weren't such tzaddikim. They really deserved to get killed, but they got killed al kiddush Hashem, and therefore, because they were killed because of the chatayim, they got a kapara. Now they're called avadecha, your servants. Amalei Abaya says, "Mikab madness haruge malchus haruge bezin." He says, "Well, how could you compare people that are killed by invading armies to people who are executed? Obviously, it's more of a kapara. If you get killed specifically, you get to Bezdin, you go to Bezdin, you say someone was mechayev misa, and he gets executed. That's more of a kapara. It's directly addressed. Someone who gets killed, but for the general avoinus of Klal Yisrael by an army that's, it's not the same kapara. It's not directly as tailored a kapara as someone who's executed. Even the loy shaloi bedin kamektali havalu kapara. Haruge bezdin kiven the bedin kamektali havalu kapara. Actually, it's the other way around. Sorry, he's saying haruge malchus, since there was no they're getting killed, but there was no sentence imposed on them. So it's exactly the opposite of what I said. Since there's no sentence imposed on them and they get killed anyway, and the guy has no feeling of that he's at least doing the right thing. So that's a kapara. Haruge bezin kivin the bin kamaktel havlu kapara. Teda, and I'll bring you right. We said in our Mishnah that someone who was killed by Bezdin, they were not buried in the cemetery together with their family. Since if you're going to say, since they get killed, that the being killed by Bezdin is a kapara, likvaru. Why shouldn't they be buried together with their family? They got the kapara. They're as good as anyone else. Why should they be buried with their family? Elamaya must be that only when it's killed, not in Bezdin, that you get a kapara, but in Bezdin you don't. So no. Miso kfurabina. You do get even from Bezdin, but you need both misa and kfura in order to get the kapara. And as the Gemara is going to explain, when it says kfura, it means once a person gets buried and the normal process of decomposition either starts or ends, we're going to see exactly what point, that's an extra kapara, and that's what gets him a kapara. So therefore, at the time of burial, he still hasn't had that second part of what he needs in order to get a kapara. We said in our Mishnah that someone who was executed, the family did not mourn him with avelus. They didn't do sit shiva, but they were einin him because they didn't do anything public. Shein aninas ela belev, because aninas is only belev. Visal kadaitach, like we had said earlier, visal kadaitach even the ikvar havalu kapara. If you're going to say like we just said, that as soon as he gets buried, when you add on the burial together with the execution, that's a kapara. Liavlu, why can't he sit shiva? At that point, the person has a full kapara, and he's just like anyone else. He should be entitled. The family should be able to publicly mourn him. He's no longer a Russia. Like I intimated before, it's not enough just to immediately, as soon as he's buried, you have to start the process of decomposition. That's the final piece of the puzzle for the person to get a kapara. Like we said in the Mishnah, even though we said the executed person can't be buried in the cemetery with the rest of his family, after his basar is nesachal, after he's fully decomposed and all that's left is a skeleton, the bones can then be buried together with the family. Then they can be buried together with the family. Shmamina. So that taka proves that you need, once someone has he was executed for his avera, and he got nisachal habasar, it got decomposed, that is enough for him to get a kapara. And then at that point, at that point he could be buried, but right away when he got buried, it's not enough for his family to sit shiva on him. He's still a rasha until the decomposition starts.
You sit shiva when the bones are buried?
It's too late. It's no longer shiva. Even the itcha. I think there's a taisus. I think the Rishonim talk about like how this compares to Cholamoid. Someone's nifta on Cholamoid, you can't sit shiva right away. You wait till after Yom Tov. Why don't we say that it's too late, right? If someone's nifta right before Yom Tov, whatever shiva there is, he sits and then it's over because once it's pushed off. So this halacha has to do with that halacha. Why, if it's nifta on Yom Tov or on Cholamoid, after Cholamoid you start a whole shiva, as opposed to before. We're saying the same thing over here, like you asked. Why don't you sit shiva after the yatzamas are buried, are removed? Ravashi Amar
versus a case where a body is not found. Sometimes someone dies in a disaster. When you find bones, wherever you find fragments, you sit shiva then. That's right. No nitcha. That's why, because it's not.
Right. Nothing happened. There was no. Didn't even have the possibility. Rashi Amavelus Memes like Kamascheles. He says that when does the Avela start? Mistimas Hagoil. As soon as you fill in the grave. Kapara Memes like Kahavia Michichazu Tzaira de Kivra Porta. As soon as the decomposition starts, it doesn't have to be completed. As soon as it starts, there's a kapara. A little bit. It means even the first step, as soon as decomposition starts whatsoever, that's already the beginning, and then there's a kapara. He says, therefore, since it's pushed off, you no longer can be misavel. If that's the case, why do we wait till there's only a skeleton left? We say that there's a kapara as soon as there's a little bit of decomposition. Why do we wait till there's no basa left at all to move this executed person to the cemetery with the rest of his family? So because it's impossible. While a body is decomposing, you can't move it. It will fall apart. So therefore, you wait until it's fully decomposed. Now, it happens. We've seen Gemaras that say that you move the body together with tfisasai. There are cases where you have to move a body, you move it together with the dirt underneath it that is absorbed. That's clearly not talking about where it's only bones. So I'm not sure why you're saying it's layafsher. I guess it's not sufficient reason to do it now. That means you're going to have to take away tfisasai, and it's going to be to some extent a bezayim for the mace. So you wait till it's fully. It means in general you're not mafana mace. You don't move a mace unless there's a reason. Over here the reason is for his covered that it could wait. But the reasons why you're mafana mace generally are because there's a problem. Like if, for example, my father's kever was in a place that got flooded. So that's not a cover for the mace. So then it's a measuring of the covered. Although it's not bakavadik to move a mace before it's fully decomposed, you have to weigh that against the lack of cover of leaving it there.
But the tfisasa was for a different reason, right?
It was because of the different parts of the dam that gets absorbed into the earth. I'm saying, but then obviously that's talking about whether there still is basa.
Not necessarily. That's what I'm saying. Maybe because it decomposed at some point, so around the tfisasa around the
I mean, after it was all.
Yeah, that they're not sure. Like Zaka style. They don't know if there's something in that.
Yeah. So the fact of the matter is that they do move them even before. That's the fact. We all know the story about the Vilna Gaon that supposedly when they moved his body, that there was no deterioration at all. They moved it a couple of years after. Okay. New topic. Kivrei de Rav have a shakal mine afra leishta bas yuma. The kever of Rav, the place where Rav was buried, people thought there was a cure to be had by using that offer for people who had a certain type of sickness, the sickness, a one-day sickness. And this offer had miraculous curative powers. Asu Amalei Shmuel. They told Shmuel what was going on. Amalhu Yos Avdin. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Karka Olamhu. It's Karka Olam. This is part of the earth. Karka Olam ain't in Aseris. And Karka Olam, part of the earth, never becomes Aser. The Siv Ayichshach es Afra al Keva B'nei Am says as a punishment that after they burnt, I forgot what they burnt. It's okay. They threw the dust on the kvarim of the people, and when makash the kever of the bnei am of the people that just like the kever is aser. That means to say that the general rule is that a kever, you're not allowed to have hana from. The Torah, we're going to see later on, we makash the kfura of Miriam, that Miriam's kever was aser, to egla arufa, which is also aser b'hana. So the rule is that a kever is aser b'hana. When we say a kever, it doesn't mean, it means the coffin and the body. It doesn't mean, what this Gemara is saying is, it doesn't mean the earth. The earth itself never becomes aser. Earth is part of the earth. It's all part of Karka Olam. It's all part of the earth, and that's unable to become Asa. And we learn it from Makash. Makash, Kever B'nei Am, L'Avodas Kechavim. When Makash, the Kfarim to Avodas Kechavim. Ma Avodas Kechavim, Mechubelei Mitzvah, just like Avodas Kechavim. As long as it's attached to the ground, it doesn't become Asa. Where do we see that? Tachsiv, Asher Atem Yoshim Oisam Es Eloheihem, that you're Yerush their gods, Alaharim, Haramim, that are on the high mountains, Alaharim Elohim. It means to say that when you inherit their gods, you have to destroy them. That means the gods that are on the mountains, Al-Haharim Elohim, their gods are on the mountains. Haharim Elohim. But if they worship the mountains themselves, that doesn't become an Avodah Zarah. It doesn't make a difference what they do. They can't make it Aser B'Hana. Similarly, I mean, I assume it's the same thing. If even people like, the Egyptians would worship the sun, it doesn't make it also for us to go out into the sun. Things that are immutable objects are, just because someone decides to be an idiot and worship it, does not make it asa b'hana. So similarly, the same halacha would apply. This is not avodah zarah, but Rav's kever, even though a kever itself is asa b'hana, but the earth around the kever is not asabana, because it's part of the earth. Same thing, that which is attached to the ground doesn't become asa. Meisvei, someone who dug a kever for his father. His father died, and he dug a kever. Then he went and he buried him in a different place. He can't bury in that place at all. So, the Gemara, what do you mean? How could it look? It's also because it's something that he designated for his father. But if we say Karka Olam, it doesnn't become Asa B'Hana. How did it become Asa B'Hana? Because he intended it for his father. So, the Gemara, we're talking about like a mausoleum, something that's a house. It's not talking about something that's Karka itself, but rather something that's extraneous and therefore can become Asa B'Hana, something that's part of a kever. I'm sorry, I know I keep using the lashon kever interchangeably. When we say kever, I mean the din that something that was being used, something that was buried, or something that was intended to be buried, is asa b'hana. Like we say by Miriam, for example, the tachrichim and the aron, and like this case, a mausoleum, part of a kvura, everything that's part of someone being buried is asa, but not the ground itself. Tashma, kever chodesh mutahana. If someone dug a brand new gravesite, a grave, it's mutah because he never put anything in it. There was never an intention to put anything in it. Hitel by nefel, also bana. But as soon as he placed even a nefel, which is the least it's a miscarriage. It's not even a fully formed person. It becomes asabana. So for the Gemara, why does the kever become aser? Kever chadash, if there's nothing in it. What hit by navel asabana? But we just said by Rav that you were allowed to take offer from the gravesite. So why did this gravesite with a navel in it become aser? This is also talking about a mausoleum, something built above ground that's not part of the earth. Toshma, nimsa ata oimer, shalish kiversein. It turns out there are three kvars: kever hanimtza, kever yadua, but kever hamazikas harabah. So kever hanimtza, what is kever hanimtza? So let's see the Rashi says what that is. Right, of course. Kever hanimtza going to chodosh b'yedei balasad shloitziva me'olam. A guy comes out to his field and he finds that someone buried someone in his field, and the person who owns the fields knows that he never gave rishus for anyone to do something. The kaivrei, let's see, the kaivrei sham, or b'gzela nikvasham. So he's buried there with gzela. So what's the din on that? So the Gemara says, since it was put in there without rishus, you can move the body. Pineu makay metar. It doesn't get a din that it's a kever legabi becoming tamei to be metama kehanim, because it was never a kever. It was just, it's like it's like when someone, a hearse, for example, if you bring a body in a hearse, or if you pass over a spot, it doesn't become tamei lo'ilam. It has to be a place that's intended to be a grave. But this was never really a grave. The person just decided to bury him there. Umutter bahana, and it's mutter bahana again. This is back to the original din that we've been talking about. That it's not it doesn't get a din of Isser Hana that normally you have by a kever. Now the next thing is kever hayadua. So that's a regular kever where a person gave permission for someone to bury. So also lefnaisa, you can't move it because the din you're not allowed to move a body. Pineu makayme tame. If you moved it, the makam is tummy because it's a real grave, and even though the body is gone, it still has a din that it's mitama. Asabana and asabana. So this is already going to be a problem, the same problem like we've had in the past. The same right we had. What does it mean, Asaban? No, it's just Karka Olam. And Kever Amazikas Arabim, if you have someone who is buried, that someone buried in a Rishus Harabim, so it's not a question of Gzela, but the problem is that it's making it difficult. Kehanim are no longer going to be able to walk there. And people who are bringing kachim, so you're allowed to move it. And if you move it, the makam is tar because Rashi says, so even though the chacham will geyser tuma on kvarim, in order to discourage people from burying in their sharab and not to cause a problem for the ram, the chacham were not misak in the tuma on that kever. But also bahana, however, it's still also bahana because it was a kever. But in any case, we have the same problem. How could both the one in the Rosh Hashanah and the one kever yadua, how could they both have the din that it's also bahana, it's only karka ilam? So it's talking about not a kever in the ground, but rather a kever on top of the ground where the binyan becomes also.
Once you move the mace from the carousel,
which case are you talking about? The last case?
Right?
Yeah.
So why should it be also?
Also, man, because it was a kever.
But you're allowed to move it. So once you move it,
just because you're allowed to move it doesn't mean it's not a kever. It means, let's say someone was buried in a grave in a cemetery, and like the example, like it started flooding and you had to move him. It's still a grave site. It still has a din that it's awesome.
And what would be the difference between kever mazik and the first case?
Hold on. You know what I'm saying? It's the din. It doesn't lose its designation as a kever because the body was moved. If the first case where the person wasn't allowed to put the body there in the first place, it never got the status of a kever. It means it was just you put it. It's like someone driving through your property. Doesn't make it a kever, or even if you put it down for a day, you put a body down on the ground, doesn't become a kever. Has to have a right to be there. Has to be put there properly. So that's why it doesn't become asur. No, but in this case, even after if it was allowed to be put there, it wasn't gzela. So when you take it away, it still becomes asur. It's still asur. Sorry, what were you saying?
I guess I'm trying to understand what's the difference between if someone buries a mace in someone else's field versus burying it in Rosh Hashanah. Why in one does become asur, another one doesn't? Like, that was your question. How I understand. Did you have Rishus to bury there or not? So if you didn't have Rishus to bury there, if that wasn't your intention, either one, then I understand that you.
You look carefully at the Rashi. I think Rashi explains this. So mazik zurab, mishakam makam hilach ramam umatam malay, mutter lefnais shloy kanas mekayme. You can move it because he doesn't own the place, but it's not gazela. But mekayme tarsh afa pisha gazu tuma al akvaris, afa pisha nit lisham like gazu al zeh. But no nami mutter. Afa gav the sur deraisu. The entire kever alav. We're saying. I'm sorry. That's talking about mekayme tamei. Mazik Saram, Nitin Kever Mazik, Nitin Rishus Lufnaisim, Niskashal Rabbin. You're allowed to move it because it's being Mazik the Rabbin, but it's not a Gzela. It's not that you stole from the Rabbin that Malcolm, but there's a external problem besides the fact of ownership that it's being Mazik the Rabbin. So Pinei Makam Talagazolem Nehan Nezik. We want them to move it because we don't want to continue being Mazik from you. Asabano, Yisur the Raisa Hubaloi Paka. That's a little interesting, but the point is that the Issa Deraisa, like we're saying, have Hana from a kever is there. The Chamim Misakin that we're not going to treat it as Tameh because we want to get rid of it, but the Issa Hana we don't want it to be. We want it to be removed, and we want it to not.
Rashi is addressing his house. So how do you explain what's the Deraisa he's talking about?
So I think the core of the Issa Hana is Midaraisa. That which something that's part of a kever is us as midaraisa, and that the Chacham had no reason to take that away. That means you could bury someone in a sharab. You're not stealing from anyone, but it causes problems, right? If you can have a grave, you're not owning now the
municipal.
Yeah,
you can't.
Just like you go into a sada, you go into a forest and you bury. You're not harming anyone. You're not taking anything from anyone. From dust to dust. But the guy the tumah, what revolves the guy moving him, the guy tumah, the chum guys, these are the chum don't want there to be tumas on a thoroughfare. So therefore, they removed what would normally be asa to move a grave, even though this did become a grave. They allow it to be moved, and they allow it not to become tamei. Not to get it in at the grave is
tamei. Read that one Rashi again. This is the first case. This is the case of where.
Which one? The like gods are allowed.
Mutter, where you buried in your friend's field without permission.
Yeah.
Even though there's azazach the deraisa,
yeah.
Like gods was there, but not nami mutter. But this deraisa who the entire love. So he's saying right now, he's saying that.
In that case,
because you weren't able to even. You had no rishus on it.
It never became a kever.
Never became a kever. So the rights never started. Like that's the point he's making. Fine.
You're trying to be mechalik between the last case.
Yeah. I think that's what it is because it sounds like he never had access to that land.
I think he's just trying to answer because the end answers that since it's the rice, it's not pakable was. So why in the first case?
Right. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Right. Fair.
Yeah. In any case, but we have a question. So this also is going to have to be answered. Why is there going to be an isser on the kever? Isser, no, it must be talking about a binyan. In fact, the Gemara of a kever hanimtza motolifnai. If it was the first case that we said you're allowed to move the kever, dilma. In fact, the Gemara dilma meis mitzvah. How do you know it's not a meis mitzvah? And there's a takanas chachamim that a meis mitzvah is kind of. It's not really takanas chachamim. Amanaskein. Tikkun Yeshua, Hinchel Yeshua Sa'aretz, that a meis mitzvah is going to be kind of makayim, right? So why aren't we worried that it's a meis mitzvah and he was kind of the makam? Meis mitzvah kind of makayim, right? So Gemara meis mitzvah the color. It's like if you just find it there and you don't know where it came from, you know it's not a meis mitzvah because you would have heard it was a meis mitzvah. Ha'orig beged lemeis. Someone weaves a beged for a meis. Abai ama aser. Abai says it's aser. Rav ama mutter. Rabba says this, but that means you had someone dies, and the lady sat down and said, "I'm going to knit for him a shroud." Abaya Amar Aser, he says Aser Hazmana Milsi. Since it was designated for the mace, it could have been a blanket for a baby. But instead she decides she wants it to be, she had in mind for this mace. So that makes it part of this din that something that's intended for a mace is Aser Bahana. Rava Amar Mitoich Hazmana Mutter, I'm sorry, Hazmana Lav Milsi. He says it's mutter because Hazmana is not a milsa, even though that was what the lady who was weaving it had in mind. That doesn't designate it as us. My time at Abaya. Where does Abaya? What's Abaya's source? This is really the beginning of this whole sugya. Abaya learns out by Egla Arufa. The din is that an Egla Arufa, when someone dies in between two cities, you have to take out a calf and you behead the calf. So once the calf goes out, is brought out and is designated that this is going to be the calf brought out and beheaded, so it becomes usher immediately. So it says by the Kfura of Miriam, it says the word sham. It says Gimel. Miriam, but he covers sham. And by Egla Rufa it says redo a signal here. So Egla El Nachalesan Ashalo Yavik by La Yizra of Orfu Sham Es Argala. So we learn just like the Egla Rufa, as soon as it's intended to be Egla Rufa, it becomes an Asr. So the by Miriam also, once she was intended to be buried, that burial site becomes Asr. Zaktamar Magla Rufa Basmana Mitzra. Hainami Basmana Mitzra. Just like Egla Rufa is Asr, as soon as it's designated, so too the burial, the things that are surrounding a burial, as soon as they're designated Asr. Rava Gama Sham Sham Me'avetz Kechavim. He learns it out from Avetz Kechavim. Ma'avetz Kechavim. If someone intends something to be used for Avetz Kechavim, that itself is not enough for it to become Asr. So too, by Miriam, that which is intended for burial is Asr. Rava, my time, why doesn't Rava learn from Egla Rufa that has mana should be a Melsa? Amalach, Mishamshim Gamrin. That which is used for a mace, which is both a avodas kechavim. I'm sorry, that which is intended to be used for something. So that the avodas kechavim, there's something that was set aside for avodas kechavim is intended to be used for avodas kechavim, and that which is intended to be used for you learn from one another. Lafuka Egla the higufa kedusha. By Egla Rufa, it's not something that's intended to be used for something else. The Egla Rufa, this calf itself was designated. It is the object. It's not being used for something else. Something which is normal is used. It means Egla Rufa, they're trying to address that Chum Torah was masakin that you should use an Egla Rufa, and that's the proper thing to do. And when someone dies, they're supposed to be buried. That's also a proper thing to do. Someone who's Ovid Avodas Kechavim, he's not supposed to be doing that. And he's saying that it doesn't become huzam. You can't say that designation a little more suspect. Say something that you wanted to do, something that you're not supposed to do, that it should become designated, you should have that then. Okay, we'll stop over here.